So far in this course, you have not seen any rotating parts. We have been saying generation, 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 generation all the time, generating voltage, generating this, generating that. But we have not really looked at how generation of electric power is done. Invariably, it is done using mechanical rotation as the input and converting that rotational energy into electrical output. That electrical output can be DC or AC. In case of AC, it can be single phase or three phase. The mechanical rotary power coming into the system is given a chance to rotate conductors, several loops of conductors in the presence of a magnetic field. And Faraday's law takes over. And EMF is generated across the two ends of each loop, and we can have several loops running in parallel, even in series if necessary, to get EMF as well as current as high as we want. But unless you have rotating conductors, you will not get the voltage that you are looking for. Whether the voltage is AC or DC is second part. Generation is always AC. Only thing is when we need DC, we convert that AC into DC. The DC generator is almost out of fashion nowadays, but we still need to discuss it in detail because this is the foundation for DC motors as well as for AC generators. Okay. Let me start showing you my own notes first, and then we will go to some PPTs and maybe some solved problems as well. The most basic form of a DC generator involves one magnet with one north pole and one south pole, and in the flux or that is generated between north and south poles, we put, let's say, only one loop of conducting wire. And for the sake of simplicity, I am showing this loop to be rectangular. It could be anything, but rectangle is easier to draw, and generally we go for rectangular construction anyway because of practical realities. So we'll assume rectangular loop, but it doesn't have to be rectangular. It could be anything. So imagine a single rectangular loop of copper or some other metal placed in the magnetic flux produced between north and south poles of a magnet. Let this loop be rotated at a constant speed of rotation. The speed of rotation is typically measured in a unit called revolutions per minute, RPM. An associated acronym is RPS, which means revolutions per second. We normally denote RPM by capital N and RPS by small n. Now, supposing we denote the vertical position of the loop by theta equal to 0, and then let's say that loop is rotating in the clockwise direction. So theta equal to 90 degrees will give us a flat, also will give us a horizontal loop. Theta equal to 180 degree will give us a vertical loop again, but in the opposite direction, and so on, right? I'm not going to go too much into electromagnetics here. You know all that quite well, because there is a relative speed with which the loop is rotating with respect to the flux, and EMF will be generated across the two ends of the loop, which I am denoting by small a and small b. the effect of opening the loop will be ignored in the discussion. There will be some minor effect due to that, but we'll ignore it. So the essential point is that an EMF will be generated across A and B because of the rotation of the loop. The magnetic flux being generated is not changing with time. We will assume that it is a constant flux with time. Now, when theta equal to 0, you will get nothing across A and B. When theta equal to 90 degree, you'll get maximum. And then as theta goes beyond 90 degrees and it's below 180 degrees, you will start seeing a decrease in the magnitude of the EMF generated. EMF means nothing is connected across A and B. You are measuring open circuit voltage. That is EMF. And then the rest of the waveform will be a repetition in the negative half. We will assume that the speed of rotation is constant. Capital N is constant. So Faraday's law tells us that the waveform of the EMF generated will be what is shown in figure 2, where I have plotted the instantaneous value of the EMF denoted by small e as a function of the angle theta that the loop is making from its starting position at theta equal to 0. Okay. This is not DC, by the way. The title is DC generators. Currently, we have got AC signal coming out. Okay, and I'll tell you in a minute how to convert this into DC. So hopefully this first page is reasonably clear. Now, let me move to the second page of this document. Figure 2 is of course here. The equation for the EMF will obviously be some peak value multiplied by sine of omega t. What is omega? 2 pi f. What is omega in terms of speed of rotation of the loop? That's a good question, right? Suppose loop is rotating at the rate of 1 RPM. That means 1 revolution per minute. Then in that one full revolution, you will get full cycle of AC from across the terminals A and B. Okay. So what you will get is in 1 second, you will get 1 upon 60. If it is 1 RPM, that means per second it is 1 by 60, right? 1 by 60 revolutions per second. This is how the analogy is made. The formula is simple here. I'll explain it to you again in another manner. Omega is related to capital N by this simple formula, which is based on common sense. Suppose number of revolutions per minute is 60. That means number of revolutions per second is 1. So omega will be simply 2 pi. If there is 1 revolution per second, you will see that the total angle through which the loop goes in that second is 2 pi, because it goes through 2 pi and comes back to the original position. For any other value of n, it can similarly be seen that the higher the speed of rotation, the larger is the value of omega generated. And frequency, of course, is omega divided by 2 pi, which is simply n by 60. I mean, simplistically speaking, if you have 1 revolution per second, you get 1 cycle per second from the system. As simple as that. If you have 1 revolution per second, that means you have 60 revolutions per minute. You will get omega equal to 2 pi radians, and f will be simply 1 cycles per second. Each rotation generates 1 full cycle. That is the starting point in this entire discussion. So if you have high speed rotation, the frequency generated will be high. That's why you see omega being proportional to the RPM value. This equation will be encountered again and again in the rest of the course. Even for AC generators, it will show up. Even for motors, it will show up. So try to memorize it if you cannot derive it from first principles. Omega equal to 2 pi n by 60, where n is capital, which means it is RPM. If it were small n, which means RPS, then you will say omega equal to 2 pi small n. This is how the frequency of the EMF is determined based on the rotation speed of the loop. Okay. Of course, we are going to convert the signal anyway into DC, so this will not be important right now. Now, how do you convert this into DC? Because currently your focus is to get DC out of it. You know that AC to DC conversion is obtained by using rectifiers, which we have seen can be obtained or can be realized using diodes. However, in case of DC generators of this kind, we do not go for that approach. Instead, we use a mechanical rectifier called commutator. What it does is equivalent to what the diodes do, but it does it in a mechanical sense. The 2 terminals coming out from, we will still assume only 1 loop. Okay, let's discuss keeping only 1 loop in our mind. So 2 terminals coming out, small a and a small b. One of them is connected to a semicircular rotating ring, and the other one is connected to another semicircular rotating ring. To each of the rings we connect fixed so-called brushes, which collect the voltages from these rotating rings. Now what happens is, during half of the rotation, small a will be connected to the left ring and small b will be connected to the right ring. But in the second half, the situation will be reversed. So the voltage that you are getting across the brushes will always have the same polarity. This is how rectification is obtained using this innovative approach called commutator. Commutator means the rings and the brushes. Brushes, by the way, are not rotating, they are fixed. They are permanently touching the rotating rings. And the connection or the touch between the brushes and the metallic rings is always going to be electrically conductive. But the rest of the construction of the brush is made of carbon because of practical reasons like reducing the effect of high temperatures on the performance and so on. We will be looking at the constructional details later. But remember that brushes in theory should be perfectly conducting, but in practice we make only the touching part conducting and the rest of it is made using carbon, so that the effect of temperature on the performance is reduced. These are called split rings because none of them is a full ring. The left one is a half ring, the right one is also a half ring. But they interchange their position every half cycle. That is why the signal connected or signal collected from the brushes will never be AC. It will be unipolar. Of course, unipolar does not mean DC, that's for sure. two fixed brushes made of carbon and metal are permanently touching the two rings. The required voltage is collected across the two brushes. During a half cycle, the brushes are connected to rings in a particular manner, and during the next half cycle, the brushes are connected to rings in the opposite manner. This ensures that the voltage collected from the brushes is always of the same polarity. This is called unipolar voltage. You have seen all this in first year courses. So the nature of voltage obtained across A and B after it has gone through the commutator, that means what you are collecting is now appearing across the two brushes. And that voltage, it's open circuit voltage, so you can call it EMF also. That nature, the voltage of the nature of that voltage will be of what is shown, of the kind shown in figure 4. Okay. It's not a DC yet, but the left, or rather the bottom half, has been converted to a positive cycle by doing that innovative mechanical design called commutator. In practice, things are not that simple because, despite your best efforts, the two rings are not perfectly symmetrical and so on, but we'll ignore all that for now. In theory, you should get perfectly unipolar voltage from this construction. Other problem is that the amount of voltage generated will not be too large if you have only one loop. So to improve that, we use a large number of loops, all sharing the same center and all rotating at the same omega or at the same RPM. Then each loop will generate some EMF, and all those EMFs will add up to give you a larger EMF. This is how real life DC generators are built. Single loop will never be sufficient. Anyway, before we go to that, let's look at mathematics again. Now the equation for the voltage will have magnitude of sine omega t instead of sine omega t, because now the values are positive throughout. And omega is connected to capital N by this simple equation 2 pi n by 60. I'm repeating it here for the sake of completeness. The time period, of course, is 1 upon f, and f is omega divided by 2 pi, all well-known things. Okay. Now, how to convert this into a DC signal? Next step. We use multi-conductor loops. Okay, that is one thing, but that probably will not help much in smoothing the waveform. However, it would help in improving the value of the peak voltage, that's for sure. Because Faraday's law has the number of turns in the equation. So if you can have more than one turn, it will definitely improve it will definitely help in improving the value of EM. Besides that, as I was mentioning already, we use more than one loops, all concentric. Now, I'm not showing the full loop, I'm only showing its vertical projection. So you are seeing only a straight line. Each loop is represented by one straight line here. Several loops are rotating they are all displaced angularly from each other by a certain value. Okay. As far as the magnetics are concerned, you are still having only one north pole and one south pole. Each loop will now produce its own EMF, which will be having a phase shift compared to other EMFs. Okay. So what happens? If we use several rotating loops using the same axis of rotation, each loop would generate its own unipolar voltage, as we have seen, but these various voltages will have a progressive phase shift among them, because each will start at zero at some value of theta, which will be different. Okay. So what will happen is shown here in figure 6. Each loop is generating a certain unipolar voltage, and if you have several of them with some phase shift between them, the total voltage coming out will be only the envelope of the waveform. And as you can see, the envelope is much more smooth compared to the individual voltages coming from each loop. This is what we do in rectifiers using a capacitor after the diodes, filtering. This is called filtering in diode rectifiers. So here, instead of doing that, we are using multi loops shifted from each other by a certain angle. And as a result, the envelope of the voltage produced becomes a lot more smooth, lot more close to DC. The higher the number of loops, the better the smoothness. That means the closer the signal is to DC. Typically 500 conductors, or 500 loops to 1000 loops or even 2000 loops are enough to get almost a flat line for the generated voltage. Because if you have too many loops, then cost will also go up and other side effects will start coming in. So there's a practical limit. You cannot have 10,000 loops. That will be too much. But on the other hand, you cannot have 100 also. That will not give you enough smoothness in the output waveform. As we solve numerical problems, you'll see the numbers more and more. So commutator converts everything into unipolar voltage. But if you are using commutator along with a large number of loops, then you almost get a DC signal. Of course, commutator becomes a lot more complicated when you have more loops. We'll come to construction details later because I cannot show them in a document of this type. You need pictorial description. For that, I have got a couple of PPTs, which I'll show later. Right now, assume that commutator is going to be a lot more complicated. For each loop, there will be one set of A and B. For another loop, there will be another set of A and B. So all that has to be accommodated in the construction of the commutator. However, the principle doesn't change. Commutator reverses itself every half cycle to produce unipolar voltage. Other thing is, instead of having only 2 poles, you could have 4 poles also, 6 also, 8 also. That can help in changing the frequency. Of course, for DC generation, we don't care much about that. But you will see soon that increasing the number of poles from 2 to 4 or 6 or 8 helps in improving the amount of EMF generated also. I'll come to that when I go to some derivations. Number of poles will never be odd. It has to be an even number, because for every north pole, there has to be a south pole. So you will use either either 2 or 4 or 6 or 8 or even higher necessary. Now, this is a very simplified description of how a practical DC generator is built using the principles we have already looked at. You need a large number of loops. So all of them are mounted in slots on a rotating shaft, which I'm showing in the center. The outer portion, the outermost portion, is known as stator, S-T-A-T-O-R. It does not rotate. It has magnetic poles bolted inside. I have shown only 4 poles. It could have been 6, it could have been 8, it could have been only 2. It all depends. For every north pole, there is a south pole also. So I'm showing 4 poles. That means 2 pairs of poles which are not rotating. They are mounted on the inside of the so-called stator, and a stator is sitting on a base which helps in mounting the entire assembly over the factory floor or over some other surface where you want to mount it. This is all very important from mechanical standpoint. Okay. Generally, these machines are quite heavy, so base has to be very strong to support the entire assembly. The stator has all the magnetic poles, and then at the center of the stator, you have the rotating mechanism. You have at the innermost a solid shaft, SHAFT, which is being driven by an outside agency and is being rotated. And on the outer side of, or on the outer periphery of that shaft, you mount another cylinder in which there is a large number of slots, each slot containing at least 1 loop, maybe even more. It's very difficult to explain it here in detail. I'll have to show you 3D diagrams also later to explain it. But try to understand that each slot is containing at least 1 loop, going and coming back on the other side. This is a long shaft, and the loops generally are quite long because they have to run around the entire circumference, around the entire periphery of the shaft. All this is a matter of design detail. How long you want the shaft to be, how long should the loop length be, etc., etc. This is all going to depend on how much power you want from the generator, essentially. But conceptually, what we have got is a large number of rotating slots mounted on the outside periphery of the shaft, and each slot containing at least 1 loop. And generally, each loop is multi-conductor, for sure. Okay. The loops on the, oh, by the way, the part that generates the electrical power is known as armature. That means the rotating part, which has got all the conductors, is going to be called armature. The loops on it are generally given the name armature windings. Okay. At the same time, what happens is the North Pole and South Pole that you have got, in theory, they could be built using natural magnetic materials. In practice, natural magnetic materials may not give you sufficient magnetic flux. And with aging, the flux decreases even further. So what we normally do is we have electromagnets. That means on the magnetic material itself, there are windings which are supplied external DC voltage. So that current flows in those windings and further reinforces the flux produced by these poles. So the windings on north poles and south poles are also there. They are known as field windings, F-I-E-L-D, because they produce the magnetic field. For very small generators, maybe you will not need field windings at all, because the natural magnets can produce enough magnetic flux for you. But for most practical cases, it's not sufficient. You have to have electromagnets. So in addition to armature windings, you will also see field windings in a typical DC generator. Field windings are supplied using another DC voltage, which may come from the same system or from elsewhere. because you are generating DC from your own system also. I am not showing here in detail, but there is a commutator connected to the shaft also, which converts the entire thing into a DC voltage. You could use part of the DC voltage to feed the DC to field windings also, or you may decide not to do that. Both options are open. Okay. So roughly speaking, this is how the cross section of a DC generator looks like, assuming 4 poles. Centrally located shaft, which is a solid piece generally, around which we have another cylinder, outer periphery of which contains the loops of conducting wire in slots. And this entire assembly is rotating, of course. The central part is rotating continuously. And there is commutator, that means slip rings, or rather split rings and brushes. All that detail is missing from this sketch. Okay. Magnetic poles here. Oh yeah, outer part is also given the name yoke. That is the outermost part. Yoke means everything brought together. Actually, this word yoke, Y-O-K-E, is a derivative from the Sanskrit word yog, Y-O-G. Yog means summation. So yoke means sum total of the entire construction. The outer part in industry is known as yoke. Some people call it housing because it has everything inside it. And outer parts, inner portion, I guess, is going to be called stator. So it's not rotating, it is being used to bolt the magnetic poles. Poles can be welded also. It all depends, It all depends on the nature of construction. But both welding and bolting are possible. Bolts generally come off with time. Weldings are generally long lasting. But repairing a bolted construction is easier compared to repairing a welded construction, because de-welding takes time. Okay, a lot of mechanical engineering is involved, by the way, in all these things. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Yeah, some written description. Static part produces the required magnetic flux. Fine. The number of magnetic poles is always an even number. Fair enough. 2, 4, 6. I think the scan is not perfect. There must be 6 also there. But I think you can make out what is missing. For small generators, natural permanent magnets can be used to construct poles. Children's toys usually don't have electromagnets. Permanent magnets, that means naturally available magnetic material, is enough because the flux necessary is not very high. That's what the second point is all about. However, for large generators needing to deliver large powers, the flux produced by natural magnetic materials is not enough. It's not high enough. And electromagnets using energizing coils wrapped on the natural magnets are deployed. The coils used to excite, the word is excite, you are exciting the poles. The coils used to excite the poles are known as field coils. And as a contrast, the coils on the rotating part are known as armature coils or armature windings. Armature means the electrical energy production portion of the assembly. Okay. So these are field coils. Poles are bolted or welded to the yoke. And these are known as salient poles. Salient means they are physically visible to you. Wait for the PPT when it comes to show you more details in a pictorial sense. Poles have specially designed shoes. Oh yeah, that's another thing you have to remember, that the bottom part of the poles is generally widened in both X and Y direction to make the flux coupling to the rotating part much more efficient. So the bottom parts are known as shoe, SHOE. Okay, they are much wider in construction, or much larger in construction, or much larger in physical area, let's say, compared to the starting portion of the poles. This helps in improving the overall power generated. The pole shoes are the bottom part of the poles. Now, the poles core, that means the original portion of the poles, it is generally made of sheet iron laminations. Again, remember in transformers, we were using laminations for reducing eddy current loss. The same philosophy is used here also for building the poles. These are generally made out of thin wafers, which are bolted together, so that eddy current loss in the poles is reduced. That will help in improving the overall efficiency. Armature is the electrical portion of the rotating part. Okay. The mechanical portion of the rotating part is known as rotor. Yeah, that's another word we use. And that rotor part is driven through a shaft at its center. So let me go back again. The solid part in the center is the shaft. Then after that, the second circle represents the rotor, which is also mechanical in nature. And after that, the electrical part begins, where you see some magnetic material coming in and then slots being built. And in those slots, you have got the loops. Armature also has laminations so that we can reduce the eddy current loss in the armature also. And suitable magnetic material, etc., is necessary, of course. It houses all the conductors. Of course, conductors have to be insulated from each other, so they are not naked. You put lamination, or you put what should I say, insulations around them. The armature has a laminated cylinder built using a suitable magnetic material. I'm not giving you details on this, but details are available. And the armature houses insulated conductors in slots around its circumference. The conductors are also known as windings or loops. And they are generally large in numbers, obviously. There's a lot of detail in terms of how these conductors are connected to each other. Some of them could be in series with each other to improve the voltage generated. Some of them may be in parallel with each other to improve the current carrying capacity of the system, and so on. Right now, ignore the details. Commutator is mounted on the rotor, of course, and is made from copper bars. I'll show you details later. Okay. On the commutator, for each loop, you have to have a separate segment. That much you can imagine, I suppose, at least. Okay. The brushes, which collect the voltage from the system, as I said, wherever they are touching the rotating part, you have to have metal. But the rest of it is generally built using carbon, because carbon doesn't change its shape too much, even if temperature is high. a high amount of temperature is generated because of large amount of power involved and large value of RPM involved. And we have to be mindful of that for practical designs. That's why we don't make brushes totally of metal. Brushes connect the generator to the outside world. The rest of the world sees only the two brushes across which they are getting the voltage that they want. Generally, the number of brushes is two, but there are systems where you can have more than two brushes also. It is not that uncommon to have more than two brushes. Okay, now let me recap once again. There are two types of windings in a DC generator. One of them is called armature winding. The other one is known as field winding. Field winding relates to the uh, magnetic poles, and armature winding relates to the rotating conductors. The two most commonly used methods for armature winding, at least take the names today, are lap winding and wave winding. There's a lot of detailed drawings available on both of these kind of windings. It is impossible to discuss all that in a class of this kind, but I'll try to show you as much as I can through PPTs. Even on the blackboard, it is impossible to draw detailed drawings. Usually engineers have to have those printed drawings on their desk and they study them very carefully when it comes to armature winding especially. Field windings are simple enough. They are not that complicated. So lap winding conceptually is the one where the ends of an armature coil are connected to an adjacent segment on the commutator. Probably it's not very clear to you right now, but when I show you the 3D pictures, you will understand this hopefully a little better. In the wave winding, the ends of the ends of a particular coil are connected to commutator segments which is slightly away from the position of the A and B for that particular loop. At least remember that. Okay. If nothing else, remember these two words, that armature windings can be of two types, lap winding and wave winding. And depending on that, we will have different ways of calculating the EMF generated, etc. I'll come to that soon. Yeah, here it is, EMF. We have been saying that EMF will be generated, right? How much? Obvious question, right? Let's try to figure out a simplified equation for calculating the EMF generated. It's a very simple derivation and it is very ideal in nature, but still it gives you a reasonably good idea of what will happen in real life. Let phi denote the flux produced by the poles, and let's say it is per pole, total flux divided by the number of poles. The flux is measured in Weber, so phi would be measured in Weber per pole. Let capital P represent the total number of poles. So capital P has to be 2, 4, 6, 8, etc. Let capital Z be the total number of conductors or total number of loops on the armature. Actually, each loop has two conductors at least. So you have to be careful. Let's talk conductors, not loops here. Okay? Total number of conductors, let it be Z, capital Z. Let the RPM at which the rotor is rotating be denoted by capital N. And what happens is we have the windings on armature so that several parallel paths are created, each generating the same amount of EMF. But by parallel connection, we ensure that the system is able to handle much larger currents. So let's say we have divided the entire armature winding into capital A number of parallel paths. That's the assumption. Now with all these, let's look at what happens. The total number of conductors is capital Z and total number of parallel paths is capital A. So the number of conductors per path will be capital Z divided by capital A. These are parallel paths, okay? Now each conductor cuts the flux. Total flux is P phi, right? Because phi is flux per pole. So total flux is P phi. That flux is cut once by each conductor in one rotation. Okay. The total flux cut by one conductor in 1 second. In 1 second, the conductor rotates capital N divided by 60 times, right? Because in 1 minute it rotates N times. In 1 minute it rotates capital N times, right? So in 1 second it will rotate capital N divided by 60 times. And each time it is cutting P phi flux. So the total flux cut by one conductor per second will be N divided by 60 into P phi. So that works out to P N phi divided by 60. And if I decide to denote capital N divided by 60 as small n, then I can call it P phi small n. That's one conductor. However, we have got per path Z divided by A conductors. Okay. So the total flux cut will be this value N P phi divided by 60 multiplied by Z by A. This is total flux cut per second by the system. And that would be the EMF. Faraday's law says that. Let's not worry about minus sign, etc. We are worrying only about magnitude sign. So the total EMF generated will be N P phi divided by 60 multiplied, the entire thing multiplied by Z divided by A. Faraday's law being applied to this construction using common sense. So the total flux generated, total EMF generated is given by this equation. Very approximate equation, but good enough for initial designs. Phi Z and P divided by 60A. And this is RMS value. Okay. We are assuming that phi is RMS value. That's why the answer is RMS value. In any case, after you have used commutation, the concept of RMS value or average value or peak value, etc., all goes away anyway. So this EB can be considered as the same thing as the DC voltage generated. Open circuited, of course. If something is connected, then things will be slightly different. We are going to see that soon through equivalent circuits. Now, for left winding, although I have not given any details, but take it from me that for left winding, we design capital A to be equal to number of poles. That is how the design is done. It's a standard followed around the world. So if you are given a DC generator with left winding, then simply put capital A equal to capital P in this equation. That's how number of parallel paths is determined. For the other kind of winding, wave winding, only two paths are used. Only two parallel paths are used. That is the standard. So then you put capital A equal to 2. At least that much you can take right now without having to go through all the detailed drawings for left winding and wave winding. So this equation, along with A equal to P for left winding and A equal to 2 for wave winding, should be used for calculating the EMF generated from a typical DC generator. Now, other thing is, how do you excite the field windings? These windings on the poles, although I've not shown the windings, I know, but there are windings on each pole that need excitation from a DC voltage. One method is you can have separate batteries feeding those windings. That is called separately excited generator. Or you can use the voltage being generated by your system to feed these windings. Then it will be called a self-excited generator. So the method of feeding the field windings leads to a classification system for DC generators. Wait a minute. Yeah, here. This is one way of defining or of one way of classifying DC generators: self-excited or separately excited. Separately excited means separate DC batteries for field windings. Self-excited means you connect the field windings to the voltage that you are generating in the generator. Now, how you connect is another story. For separately excited case, obviously, a separate DC supply will be required, which is cumbersome, but in some cases it is a must because of practical realities. In other cases where you have self-excitation, whether you connect the field windings in parallel with the armature windings or whether you connect field windings in series with the armature windings or whether you connect part of the field winding in series with the armature winding and the remaining part in parallel with the armature winding. Depending on that, we define series wound generator, shunt wound generator, or compound wound generator. Compound means part of the connection is in parallel between the two windings and the remaining part is in series. Shunt wound means both the windings are purely in parallel, 100% in parallel. Series wound means both the windings are 100% in series with each other. All options are open. Compound wound generally gives you more flexibility in terms of optimizing the performance. Okay. Depending on the nature of winding, the equivalent circuit of a DC generator changes. And this is the case of a separately excited DC generator. Symbolically, what we do is we draw a diagram shown here. We show the rotating part or armature by using a circle with one brush on the top and one brush at the bottom. And in the center, we show EB, the EMF generated. The rotation direction doesn't have to be shown, although I keep showing it all the time. You don't have to show it because you don't know whether it is rotating counterclockwise or clockwise. You don't care really much, because it is the magnitude of EB that matters. Of course, polarity would change, I know for sure. If you have clockwise rotation, you'll get a certain polarity out of it. If you have counterclockwise rotation, you'll get the opposite polarity, right? All that is important. I'm not saying it is not important, but don't bother showing direction of rotation all the time. Although I have the habit of showing it all the time. More important is that on the armature side, you will see that armature windings have their own resistance for sure. Inductance is also there, but you are talking about DC signal, so effect of inductance is not going to be important. As a result, on the armature side, we put in the equivalent circuit, we put a so-called armature resistance, RA, in series with the armature before we get the actual voltage out from the armature. These two terminals, plus and minus, are representing the two brushes. But after all the losses have been accounted for using RA in the armature. Actual brushes are shown on the left side on the top and bottom of the circle. But in reality, the voltage collected will be what is shown between plus and minus signs. I'm calling that voltage V. In many books, they call it VL, load voltage, or VT, terminal voltage. Fine. Now, the field winding because it's a separately excited case, field winding is totally independent. It doesn't depend on the voltage generated in the system. It has its own DC voltage VF coming in, and it has its own field winding resistance, which is just going to be denoted by RF. Typically, RF is much large compared to RA. Lot of wire is used on the field windings to get good magnetic flux phi out of each pole. The field current going in is going to be denoted by IF. It is obvious that IF is VF divided by RF, simple Ohm's law, right? And also, if some load is connected between plus and minus terminals on the right hand side, some current would flow. Let that current be called IA, armature current. Then it is obvious that EB minus IA RA will give you V. Simple circuit theory, right? So separately excited case is not that difficult to analyze. Why are we putting the symbol B along with E? Because this is generally known as back EMF. There's a reason why we use the word back. Right now, let's not bother about it. B, I'll explain later why B is going to denote back. Just assume that it's EMF. That means open circuit voltage V will be same as EB. If nothing is connected across the generator, then you will simply see the EMF across the two output terminals. Okay. So these are various parameters of the equivalent circuit. VF is the voltage externally applied to field windings. RF is the resistance of the field winding. EB is the back EMF generated by armature. We have already got equation for it, phi ZNP divided by 60A. I'll just show you once again. This is the equation I'm talking, where A value depends on the nature of armature winding. Okay, these are the values. So EB will be known for a given machine. By the way, machine is the word used for both generators and motors. In case of generator, what we are doing is we have got mechanical power coming in, mechanical rotary power coming in, and we have got electrical power going out. In case of a motor, it's the other way around. You will be supplying electrical power input and you'll be getting rotary mechanical power output. Theory will change, but conceptual understanding will not change much when we go to DC motors. Right now, let's concentrate on DC generators themselves. But when I say machines, what I am telling you is that my statement is equally applicable to motors also. Anyway, coming back to separately excited generator, DC generator, of course. The equations that we need to use are here, fairly straightforward, based on simple circuit theory applied to the equivalent circuit shown here. EB and VF are totally independent of each other in this case, because it's a separate excitation. It's a two voltage equivalent circuit here. One of them is EB or V if you want, and the other one is VF. Okay, so when we do numerical problems, you don't have to recall these equations. Most of the time, the calculations are straightforward based on your understanding of circuit theory and the equivalent circuit that you can draw very easily once you know whether excitation is separate or something else. The value of armature resistance RA and the value of field resistance RF is generally given to you. And parameters for calculating EB are also generally given to you. By default, we are assuming that brushes have no losses. In practice, there may be losses in the brush also. In the two brushes, you may have some voltage drop. If nothing is given, you ignore that. If something is given, you'll have to accommodate that in your calculations. Now, the second case is shunt excited case. It's a self-excited case. That means you are using the generated voltage itself to feed the field windings. There's no VF here. In separately excited case, we had VF. In shunt excited case, VF is not there. What you are doing is the voltage coming out of the armature is connected across the field windings. So the equivalent circuit becomes like what is shown here. Circle is there and the two brushes are there. Then you have armature resistance, which will be given to you. After that, whatever is coming out is going across the field winding and is also connected to the load on the right hand side. In this case, we define the armature current IA, the field current as IF, and the total current going out as load current I. In many books, they call it IL. And the voltage developed across the two terminals of the generator as V. Although in many cases in the books, you will find they call it VL or VT. It is obvious if you apply KCL at this node that IA plus IF equal to I. No, I'm sorry. IA equal to IF plus I. Total amount of armature current coming in will be equal to field current going out plus load current going out. Okay, that's one equation. The other equation will be EB minus IARA will be V. And the third equation will be EB minus IARA, the entire thing divided by RF will give you IF. I think all these equations are given here in case you are not sure. IA is IF plus I. IF is EB minus IARA divided by RF. And V is EB minus IF. Okay. So shunt excited case is easy to handle mathematically at least. Now series excited case. Here the field windings go in series with the armature windings. So RF and RA are now going to be part of the same path. Obviously, now IF and IA and I are all the same thing. Load current is same as armature current and that is same as field current. That's the uniqueness of series connection. So equation that you need is simple enough. EB minus IA multiplied by RA plus RF should give you V. And of course, IA equal to IF equal to I. Generators generally don't use this connection, but motors do. But anyway, in theory, at least this is possible. You can have both the windings in series with each other. Okay. And the third case is a combination of shunt and series case. That means part of the winding, part of the field winding is in series with the armature winding and the remaining part is in parallel. There are equations here, but I'm not giving them to you in detail. Based on what is given to you, you better use the basic circuit theory to come up with the answers. Compound winding means a combination of series winding and parallel winding or shunt winding. A portion of the field winding is in series with the armature winding and the remaining portion is in parallel with the armature winding. This is actually used a lot in real life because this gives you flexibility to improve the performance in a continuous manner based on the load situation. How much of the field winding is in series and how much is in parallel may become a factor that you keep changing dynamically to get the best out of the system all the time. But again, for small power applications, you don't care much. Maybe shunt winding will be enough. Okay. Yeah. In case of transformers, we saw a concept called voltage regulation. It applies here also. The output voltage, that means the load voltage, at full load, that means something is connected which is forcing the system to draw full rated current. At that time, what voltage you are getting? Minus open circuit voltage, no load voltage, divided by full load voltage, and the entire thing multiplied by 100. That is the definition of percentage voltage regulation. Maybe we should put a minus sign outside the bracket here, because no load voltage will generally be higher compared to full load voltage. But anyway, it is the magnitude that I'm really obsessed with. Typically, a voltage regulation of 5 to 10% is acceptable. More than that means you have to do something with your generator. Ideally, it should be zero. Ideally, no load voltage and full load voltage should be the same, but in practice, it's not possible. And this applies to all kind of DC generators, whether they are shunt wound, series wound, or compound wound. Okay. Now, one or two numerical problems before we close for today. Okay, there's a small document here, maybe worth. Yes. Simple question. A 4-pole DC generator has a wave wound armature. That means capital A equal to 2. Number of parallel paths equal to 2. If you are not sure, you can go back to my notes once you get them. So this 4-pole, that means capital P equal to 4. Capital A equal to 2 because of the wave wound nature of the armature. It has 792 conductors. So capital Z is 792. The flux per pole, which is phi, is 0.0121 Weber. Determine the speed at which the generator should run to generate 240 volt at no load. 240 volt at no load means back EMF or EMF is 240 volts. So it's a straightforward calculation. EB, as you know, is given by this equation, phi Z and P divided by 60A. You are given phi, you are given Z, unknown is N. P is also given as 4, A is given as 2. And calculate N. Put all the values here. 240 equal to 0.0121 into 792 into N into 4 divided by 120. And solve that equation to get N. Right here. The formula to be used is actually N equal to 60A EB divided by phi ZB. 60A is 2 because of the wave wound nature of the generator. EB is 240 volts given to you. Phi is given as 0.0121. Z is given as 792 and P is given as 4. Plug in all the values. The amount of RPM required to get the 240 volt voltage at no load turns out to be about 751.3. So you need this kind of rotation speed to get 240 volt open circuit voltage from this generator. Of course, once you load, the voltage will go down for sure. That's why we have equivalent circuits. Second problem, a DC generator when driven at 1000, okay, something is missed. It means 1000 RPM, I know. A DC generator when driven at 1000 RPM with a flux per pole of 0.02 Weber produces an EMF of 200 volt. Okay. If the speed is increased to 1100 RPM and the flux per pole is reduced to 0.019 Weber, what will be the new value of EMF? Okay, so same equation but applied more intelligently. In the first case, you are given EMF equal to 200 volt. So write down the equation. 200 equal to phi ZNP divided by 68. Phi is given as 0.02. ZP divided by A is not given, but you don't need it. From equation at the top, you figure out the value of ZP divided by A. It is same for the machine all the time. Z doesn't change in a given machine, P doesn't change, A doesn't change. Okay, it's a mature design, right? So based on information in the first sentence, you calculate ZP divided by A for the machine. In fact, ZP divided by 60A is what I have calculated, which turns out to be 10. Now, in the second case, I use that value of ZP divided by 60A along with new values of speed and phi to calculate the new value of EB. Phi has changed to 0.019, N has changed to 1100, and ZP by 60A is known to be 10. So plug in all the values. So in the second case, the EMF generated turns out to be 209. Okay. Okay, 2 or 3 more minutes. Problem 3, a shunt DC generator. Okay, you have been told that field winding is in parallel with the armature winding. A shunt DC generator delivers 450, I think it's RPM, I believe. Maybe we'll see what it is, because something has been missed again. Delivers 450, maybe it's watts, at 230 volt and has armature resistance RA equal to 0.003 ohm, field resistance RF equal to 50 ohm. Calculate the generated EMF. Now, I have given you the equivalent circuit for this case. You may have to go back to it, but you will recall the equation that IF is VF divided by RA. That's a shunt case, right? And VF is 230 volt, which is same as VL or V. So 230 volt divided by RF. RF is 50 ohm. You calculate the field current. It turns out to be 4.6 amperes. Okay. Okay, now I know. This is actually 450 amperes. In the first sentence, A has been cut out because of poor scanning. You just make that change when you get the document. A shunt DC generator delivers 450 amperes. That is what is given. So I, the load current is 450 amperes and the load voltage is 230 volt. So if the load current is 450 amperes and field current is 4.6 amperes, IA, no, this cannot be right. I'll have to change this. I think IA will be the summation. There's a mistake here. I can see the IA value will be load current value plus the field current value. If you look back in the equivalent circuit that I have given you, you'll see that. So this value actually should be 454.6 ampere. This is wrong. And once you know that, you use the simple formula 230 is the, actually I have not drawn the diagram, that's why it's getting confusing. But if you go back to the document which is going to be sent to you, you will see that EB is more compared to V by this amount IARA. As simple as that. EB is 230 volt plus IARA. Of course, IA value is wrong, but the rest of the calculations are correct. You'll have to look into the previous document to see the equivalent circuit. And from there, you will see that EB is V plus IARA. That is what I'm using here. Of course, the value of IA is wrong, I think. But this is the method to calculate the amount of EB required. The last one. I think we are almost out of time.